Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about why it is difficult to conclude that someone actually died due to the lack of oxygen in India's second COVID-19 wave. We will also discuss the case against the businessman Raj Kundra. But first, we talk about the Tokyo Olympics. After being postponed by a year because of the pandemic, and despite Japanese citizens protesting against it, the world's biggest sporting event is all set to begin today. This year's Olympics is said to be one of the most expensive ones in its history, with the organizing committee estimating the cost to be at $15.4 billion. Though concerns and fears around it still remain, which is why the event this time will largely be taking place without any spectators. Indian Express's sports journalist Mihir Vasavada, who's also the co-host of the Express Sports podcast, is in Tokyo right now, and he spoke to us about the Indian contingent and the kind of measures that are in place to keep them and the organizers safe. So Mihir, even though they have finally decided to host the Olympics, there are still some uncertainties that remain. We know that cases are still being reported in Tokyo, and the organizers, even until a few days ago, were still supposedly considering a last-minute cancellation. Is that right?
Considering is unfair, Shashank. I mean, we can just see it from their point of view, and they were being realistic of the situation. On ground, it is very difficult in Tokyo. On Friday, they announced that there were 1,900 odd COVID positive cases, which is a 6-month high for the city. So the organizers, on the back of their mind, they seem to have this realization that if the cases continue to spiral out of control, and if the number of cases inside the Olympics, and by inside the Olympics, I mean among the thousands of people who have traveled, be it seats in the Olympic Village, the officials, the members of the International Olympic Committee and the international federations, as well as the media and broadcasters. If the cases among these people continue to go up, then we might be staring at a scenario where they might have to do the inevitable.
So what kind of measures are in place so that players and the organizers and the media remain safe?
The measures started long before people actually started traveling to Tokyo. Some of them we have discussed in our sports podcast, Game Time, but to quickly run you through whatever everyone had to do to reach Tokyo. So, for example, all of us who have come from India, we had to undergo COVID-19 tests every day for 7 days. We also had to agree to their demand of monitoring movements through the GPS. We had to download 4 apps on our mobile, sign up on 5 extranets, which will update on everything, on COVID cases to our own health, everything that you can imagine. So there is a lot of logistical work on one hand. And then once you are in Tokyo, you're not allowed to move anywhere practically without the organizer's approval. So the only places where you can go freely is from your hotel to the venues and back. That too has to be done in transport that is designated by the Tokyo Olympics organizers. You can't use public transport. You can't go to the grocery store or restaurants. It's a state of emergency in Tokyo, but it isn't as serious as it sounds. Everything is still open. People are still out on the streets. But if you are a traveler for the Tokyo Olympics, you're largely confined to the venues and your hotel and being tested almost every day.
Yeah, and talking about measures, the reason your voice probably sounds a bit muffled to the listeners is because you're wearing a mask even while recording. You're not allowed to take it off, right?
Not even for a second, Shashank, only if I'm sipping a coffee or eating something.
Oh, wow. Okay. So tell us what happens if a player tests positive at some point during the tournament.
There have been instances. So on Thursday, there were 2 players, one from Netherlands and one from Chile, who tested positive immediately after arriving at the Tokyo airport. And they were taken to a quarantine facility, which the government here has earmarked. And once the events begin on Saturday, and if players then start testing positive, they have protocols. So if it's a mild case, they'll be sent to an isolation facility. If it's serious, then they have kept a couple of hospitals on standby where the cases will be treated.
And even in the run up to the Olympics, there had been a lot of opposition from the citizens of Japan, specifically from Tokyo, against the event. You mentioned the city on Wednesday reported over 1,800 cases. Are things still tense in the city about the Olympics?
Uh, it's hard to say if it's tense, but there's certainly not the same buzz that you see in any other Olympic city. I mean, we are talking about the mood in the city 24 hours before the opening ceremony. And if you just, I mean, we are not allowed to walk onto the streets, but when you travel from your hotel to the venues, you can see there's absolutely nothing, so to say, in terms of the excitement or the build up to the Olympics. You don't see huge flags or huge posters of the local heroes. There aren't a lot of people, of course, flocking to the stadium because they're not allowed to be in and around the stadiums, which are now secured by the security guards just to ensure that people do not venture in or out of those places. So the mood on the ground, even though there are lots of people on ground, people are traveling to work, people are going to restaurants, they're going for shopping, but very little Olympic related per se.
Okay, so now let's talk about the Indian athletes, the Indian contingent. Could you talk about what makes the Indian contingent different this time?
The main reason I'd say is a lot of them have experienced winning, and a lot of them do not have the fear of losing. Now, these two things are really important, and they make this Indian team very different from the earlier ones. You have a lot of young athletes who have dominated the world. I mean, in their sport. So, for example, if we take a look at young shooter Saurabh Chaudhary, he has only known to win. He just knows that feeling. He's been so dominant in his sport, which is the 10-meter air pistol event in shooting. He's been so dominant that almost every tournament he has entered since he started shooting, he has returned with a medal. So someone like Saurabh does not know what losing is, and he's always played with that spirit. On the other hand, you have someone like a Vinesh Fogart. She's completely fearless. In her mind, she's convinced she can beat anyone and everyone, and she isn't afraid of losing. Whenever she has lost in the past, she has worked extremely hard to figure out a solution to beat that opponent. And Shashank, at this Olympics, that will be one of the biggest themes. I mean, a lot of Indian athletes are street smart. They are experienced enough to know what has to be done to win a match and win a medal. It'll all come down to nerves. Luckily for them, there won't be any crowd, so there won't be pressure in that sense of performing in front of thousands. It'll just be about handling the moment. If they can do that, India can be optimistic of a good medal haul.
And so, apart from Saurav and Vinesh, who are some of India's other big medal hopefuls?
The list is long. If we were to go day by day, then then the first day itself, the first day of competition is Saturday, and there are at least 5 medal potentials there. So your day starts with the 10-meter air rifle women's event, where Apurvi Chandela and Elavenil Valarivan, they'll be in action. Both of them have been in the top 3 of world rankings in the last couple of years. They've slipped now, but they're still among the best in the world. It's a very, very competitive field, so a medal won't come easy. But it's also the first medal of these games. And if either Apurvi or Elavenil can do their thing, who knows? India's Olympics can start with a huge bang. After that, you have Mirabai Chanu in weightlifting. She is one of a firm medal contenders for India at these Olympics. I mean, she just needs to complete 6 valid lifts and match her personal best. If she does that, we can almost certainly say that she'll be among the medals. You also have Saurabh Chaudhary. We mentioned him. He's one of India's brightest young prospects. He'll be in action later on Saturday in around afternoon India time or mid morning India time. In his event, 10-meter air pistol, Saurabh has been flawless. So you can practically hope for him to kind of continue his rich vein of form and see where that leads to him. And finally, you also have mixed archery, where Deepika Kumari and Atanu Das, husband-wife archery duo, they'll be in action. They have had some decent performances under their belt. It'll all come down to how they handle the pressure, because Deepika Kumari, we've seen in the past, she hasn't done really well when it comes in high pressure situations. So for them, it will come down to handling the nerves, and for the rest, it's all about living up to their potential.
And is there a particular event that you are especially looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to Mirabai Chanu on the first day. I'm again talking only about the first day right now because it will be a huge thing to get into the other days. I mean, too much to pick from. On the first day, I'm particularly excited about Mirabai Chanu. I mean, she had a massive heartbreak in the Rio Olympics, and after that, she's come back really, really strongly, worked on her fitness, battled very dark days of failure from Rio, and also her injuries. So she's come a long way since 2016 Olympics and now finds herself in within touching distance of a medal over here. So that will be a great story to follow. And if we're talking about sports outside the medal profits, then the first match of the Indian women's hockey team against the Netherlands, that'll be a nice one to watch. India will be massive underdogs in that match. Netherlands are head and shoulders above almost any other team in the world. So for the Indian women who have made a lot of progress in the last 4 or 5 years, it'll be a perfect test to begin their Olympic campaign. If they can even snatch a draw, it'll be a great start to their campaign.
To keep yourself updated about everything related to the Olympics, you can subscribe to the Express Sports podcast, co-hosted by Mihir Vasavda and Gaurav Bhatt. From today, they kick off their Olympic special series called Pod of the Rings. Do check it out. The link to it is in today's show notes. And next, we talk about the COVID-19 deaths that occurred due to the lack of oxygen. Earlier this week, Bharti Pawar, the Health and Family Welfare Minister, made a rather curious statement in the Rajya Sabha. She said that no deaths due to the lack of oxygen have been specifically reported by the state or union territories. This is despite the fact that the lack of oxygen was perhaps the biggest problem during India's massive second COVID-19 wave. People were left scrounging for oxygen cylinders for their loved ones, and hospitals in cities like Delhi had even resorted to posting on social media that they had only a few hours of oxygen left and that they desperately needed help. It is clear that the lack of oxygen contributed to the mortality that we saw in the second wave. But then why did the Health and Family Minister make such a statement? Turns out that attributing a cause of death specifically to the lack of oxygen isn't as easy as it may sound. In this segment, Mallika Joshi, Indian Express's chief reporter, joins us to explain this problem. Mallika, we obviously know that the lack of oxygen was a major problem during the second wave. So how is it that Bharti Pawar was able to make such a statement in the Rajya Sabha?
So, according to what was also part of the reply that they had submitted in the parliament, they said that the states had not provided them with any information to state that there had been deaths because of the lack of oxygen in any of the states. Now, again, as you said, we all know that states like Goa, Delhi, they all reported deaths, and these are hospitals. And in the case of Goa, the minister on record saying that these deaths had happened because of lack of oxygen. So the thing, so what we spoke to a lot of experts here, people in the government as well as hospitals, both private and government. So, it turns out that when you prepare a death summary in any case, or if you do an autopsy, in the case of an autopsy, it is extremely difficult to, just through medical evidence come to the conclusion that there was lack of oxygen, that's why a patient has died. Because it would all have signs of hypoxia. But hypoxia is not just because of that one reason. As a doctor told me, that a patient whose oxygen level has been going down, despite being provided with supplemental oxygen in the form of either through oxygen tank or through the liquid medical oxygen line that has been laid in hospitals, a lot of patients who are being given this supplemental oxygen also die. This is something that we all know already. But they also spoke about how there are other ways to find out. One being to check whether the hospital had any oxygen supply at the time that the death happened. The second way is also to check if oxygen saturation levels for all patients who died in that duration dipped at the same time. And if you match this with what the hospital's oxygen availability was at that time, if the pressure suddenly dipped, if the supplies were starting to run out, then that correlation can be drawn. So there are ways to do it, but from what documents have been made available, especially in the case of Jaipur Golden Hospital, where the hospital had said that 21 patients had died on April 23 because of the lack of oxygen, because the hospital had run out of stock. In those cases, what has happened is the patient's case records do not mention that the hospital had run out of oxygen. And this has come out in the report of a 4-member committee that was formed that submitted this report to the Delhi High Court in May, wherein it is very clearly mentioned that there is no written record provided to them to say that the hospital was short on oxygen. According to the report, the documents also go on to say that the patients who died were being provided supplemental oxygen till the end. So the problem that they faced in saying that these deaths were because of the lack of oxygen.
Okay, so one thing is that it is difficult to medically conclude whether a particular death was due to the lack of oxygen. And the other reason you say it is because there is no written record that a patient's death was due to the lack of oxygen. But how much does this problem also have to do with just hospitals being reluctant to put down on paper that a patient died due to the lack of oxygen, because the hospital is the one that is supposed to provide oxygen, right?
A lot, actually. A lot of it has to do with that, because as soon as you put down on a record, on a document, and say that this patient died because we could not provide him or her with oxygen, that opens you up to a lot of legal action, perhaps. And it can also mean that you stand a chance to lose your medical license. So that is actually one of the biggest reasons. And as I said, I spoke to a lot of doctors across hospitals, private and government both. And all of them said that these things are not mentioned on the case files or death summaries, because, as I said, it will open the hospital up for a lot of litigation.
Right. And we also had Delhi's Deputy Chief Minister Manish Sisodia react to this. What did he have to say about this entire matter?
So, the Deputy CM yesterday, he held a press conference wherein he laid the blame of this entire, we could call it a fiasco, on the center. So what the Delhi government had done after this report had been filed in the High Court, which said that the deaths in Jaipur Golden Hospital could not ascertain to be because of lack of oxygen. So after a few weeks, the Delhi government set up a committee which was supposed to look into claims of deaths because of oxygen shortage and then provide them with compensation worth 5 lakh each in case the claims turned out to be true. This, the Deputy CM said, was being done because they believed that people had died because of the lack of oxygen and they wanted them to be properly compensated. This file was then sent to the LG, the Delhi LG Anil Baijal, but the committee was not allowed to be formed. So the Deputy CM said that it was because the center did not want this fact to come out that people had actually died because of the lack of oxygen, that the committee was not allowed to be formed. But our sources told us that the LG had actually shot the committee down because he believed that since the Supreme Court already looking into the matter, there was no need for another committee to be set up.
And right now we're talking about Delhi, but do we assess that these problems similarly exist in other states as well?
So we had heard from Goa, especially a lot of cases we'd heard from Goa about how people had died over there because of the lack of oxygen. The health minister, in fact, said on record at that time that people had died because there was no oxygen in hospitals. And then across the country, in so many places, even if you look at NCR towns, people were constantly struggling to find beds and find oxygen. Even when they were in hospitals, there were alarms about this hospital running out of oxygen or that running out of oxygen. So while it's not possible to say with utmost certainty that this has happened in other places as well, I think it would be safe to say that such problems, at least the lack of oxygen, existed in several parts of the country. In Delhi, when we talk about Batra Hospital, which was the second hospital that said that 12 people in their hospital had died because they ran out of oxygen, there the head of the hospital still maintains that these people died because of the lack of oxygen. When we spoke to them, they made it very clear that there is no doubt in their minds that this is what had happened to these patients. And Batra Hospital was among the many hospitals in Delhi that reached out to the government, it reached out to the court, it reached out to media to tell them that they were running out of oxygen and patients could die if they don't get supply on time, which the head says is exactly what happened.
And what do you think the Delhi government, for example, can do to investigate this matter further, so that we have on record how many people died due to the lack of oxygen?
So if the Delhi government now decides to form another committee to look into these issues, I think it should also look into the oxygen availability in hospitals at that time, their oxygen levels in their storages. Though it is late, if it had been done at that time, as a doctor told me, if they had looked at the oxygen monitors of all the patients who died on these days, 23rd April at Jaipur Golden Hospital and the 1st of May at Batra Hospital, and if they observe a dip in the oxygen saturation levels of these patients at the same time, these are also ways to ascertain whether there was an oxygen shortage, coupled with the hospital's availability, plus the calls that they had made to the government, the messages that they sent across, detailing how much oxygen they have and how much more they need. These are things they will have to look into before saying whether the death was because of the lack of oxygen or not. This is something that has come out very clearly in the report submitted by the 4-member committee to the High Court. The biggest reason for them to say that it cannot be ascertained that these people died because of the lack of oxygen was because they had no documents to show that the hospital had actually run out of oxygen. So I think it becomes important for the government to take charge and go through the records, go through medical oxygen availability records to find out what exactly the case was.
And in the end, we talk about Raj Kundra. Earlier this week, businessman Raj Kundra, who is the husband of actor and businesswoman Shilpa Shetty, was arrested by the Mumbai police. This arrest was in connection with an adult film racket that he had allegedly been running. To understand this case and what led to the arrest, Mohammad Thawar, who reports on Mumbai crime for the newspaper, joins us. So Mohammad, what exactly is this case against Raj Kundra and what do we know about this racket he was running?
So basically what happened is in the first week of February, the Mumbai police received a tip-off that there was a porn film was being shot at a bungalow in Mud Island. Mud Island is at the northern corner of the city. So when they raided the place, they found a guy and a girl. They were barely clad and in an intimate position. So they realized that the information was correct. So at that point, they arrested 5 people from there, including the director, the script writer or whatever. And the girl was rescued from there. Later, when they recorded her statement, she said that she had come from Bid in Maharashtra. And she said that they had initially promised me that they'll give me a role in a web series. And then today, suddenly they changed the script and they said that, so when I refused to expose myself, they said that then you'll have to bear the production costs. And eventually you had no option but to kind of go ahead with it. So then the police began. And so this began as a case of women being kind of pushed into this thing. So the initial arrests that were made, and they found that this was happening often. Another girl who had come to the city from Jharkhand said similar thing had happened to her. So the trend was to go to a bungalow in a far-flung area of Mumbai and shoot the film. Then what the cops focused on, the second part of it, was, okay, so where are these films being uploaded? Because in India, pornography is banned. So how is that happening? Then they realized that, okay, there are especially this one industry that was based in UK called Kenrin, that was uploading these videos. So they were shooting these videos and selling it to Kenrin, and Kenrin was uploading this from the UK so that they could bypass the restrictions on pornography in India. And then they began investigations and they found this guy called Umesh Kamath, who used to work for Kenrin, and searching for his laptop and his phone and questioning him, they realized that actually a lot of this stuff is being done from Vihan Industries in Mumbai, which is owned by Raj Kundra. And even the Kenrin company is owned by Raj Kundra's brother-in-law. So they suspected that these industries are just facade so that it is not traced back to Raj Kundra. So then accordingly, on Monday, they raided Raj Kundra's Vihan Industries in Andheri. And they found some incriminating evidence, is what the cops say. They said they found WhatsApp groups printouts in which Raj Kundra was overseeing the entire thing, right from which woman was to be cast where. And in fact, they also had an anti-piracy group where they took down pirated content of their porn movies. So based on the raid, that's what officers told me, that based on the raid on Monday, till that point of time, they were dithering whether they should call him for questioning, whether they should. But they found a lot of evidence from his office. They in fact also found some porn clips there. That's when they decided to call him for questioning. And then late Monday night, they decided that we have enough evidence to show that Raj Kundra is, in a sense, one of the main guys who's running this entire network, and they placed him under arrest.
Right. And just to be clear, are these hardcore porn movies we are talking about, or are they semi-porn films where actors don't engage in intercourse and where genitalia is not really shown?
That's an interesting question. Now, based on some of the WhatsApp chats that the police had early put in the charge sheet of early accused in the case, so what they do is basically they have two kinds of content, because in the WhatsApp chat they had said that for now the cops are looking at us, so let's keep the hardcore stuff away, which means they have both porn and soft porn. So when they would realize that cops we could be in trouble, so then they would ensure that the absolute hardcore porn content was taken off, and then they would for the meantime have semi-porn, but mainly porn, because that's what we asked cops, and they said that yeah, because a lot of apps what they also do is that they show semi-porn and they try to say that it's erotica, it's not porn, so that line is pretty blurry. But in this case they said that we have found cases of complete nudity and it is porn, it is not anything else.
And how many such movies do cops think exist, and how many such women were forced into this?
So the police believe that there were a lot of women. So the problem in this case, or what cops have said they're facing, is that not a lot of women would be willing to come forward and say that. So hence they did not quite have the estimate of how many women. But what they're saying is a lot of these women who came from smaller villages or from smaller towns, who wanted to kind of make it as an actor, who came to Bombay. So a lot of these women were targeted by these people. So the way it worked is they would promise the girl 15 to 20,000. And the shoot would happen in one day, and the person who is, for example, producing it, or the cameraman is editing it, so between 4 or 5 people they would make the movie and then they would sell it off. And as per cops, like especially during the lockdown, there was a lot of demand for this kind of content, so their business kind of really grew during the lockdown. And as per police, they had like lakhs of viewers, and it really had caught on, especially during the lockdown. Yeah.
So what action has the police been able to take so far against the people involved?
So see, now as a start, the cops are saying, see, they are aware that there are many such apps that are there. And they're also aware that some of these apps may not completely be porn. They would be semi-porn, and they will say that it's erotica. So right now they're going after people whose names have appeared in the complaint, like in the raid that they have done. So right now, Raj Kundra has been arrested, and they're saying that they will also be looking at other apps that they find which kind of also stream pornographic content. But right now they're starting with Raj Kundra because they believe that even apart from, so this app was called Hot Shots. And apart from this app, they believe that there are other apps as well that he had just moved to. But one of the things that one does wonder is, because there are so many such apps, so how far will the police go in terms of casting their net will remain to be seen. But what they are saying is that Raj Kundra apparently was one of the big fishes, and that because of action in this case, a lot of these apps, at least for temporarily, are down. And so, yeah, I mean, in that sense, they're saying that it has had an impact where, based on a lot of these apps that they had information about when they went there, those apps were either down or they were not streaming any such content. So a lot of them have also taken down such content. But then again, I mean, whether it's temporarily done because right now the police is going after them or not will kind of remain to be seen.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.